Sorry, every time I get a phone call, it's going to stop the video, and I'm not sure if putting it on silent is going to stop that. So hopefully this doesn't irritate you too much, but you'll just have to, it'll just be broken up into small chunks. So the cell membrane, like the border between two countries, in some areas it's very easy to cross the border. You know, if you've got the right supplies and if you've got the right skills, you know, if you're the right kind of person to be capable of doing that, you can walk across the border out in in the middle of the desert or in the middle of the forest, and nobody be looking at you, nobody be stopping you. And you don't need a visa, you don't need a passport, you don't need to bribe any guards, you just do it if you're capable of doing it and if there's a path. On the other hand, there's areas of the border where there's tons of security, where there's a border control guard station and there's gates and lights and authority figures with weapons and paperwork, and it's very tightly regulated who may come and go through that gate. And that's what the cell membrane is like. The cell membrane is permeable to gases and ions, molecules of all types, but in different ways depending on where you're at in the membrane. And this fact that the cell is capable of regulating what comes in and out allows it to set the stage. It allows it to set up the intracellular fluid to be the composition that it wants, and the same for the extracellular fluid. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit why, but at the end of the day, I just want you to know that inside the cell it's more negative and outside the cell it's more positive. But I'm going to explain it a little bit because I don't want to do a lot of because I said so. I want you to understand why. So, when it comes to the cell membrane and these different paths in and out, imagine the most rugged area of forest along the border of two countries. And it has to be the right kind of person to survive that terrain and make that journey. Most of the border of a country is really rugged, hostile terrain that not just anybody can get through. Forests, foxes, thorns and vines and mud and things. But things like oxygen, CO2, they've got what it takes. They can come and go as they please. They're like super Rambo Navy SEAL people. And they come and go as they please. There's nobody that can stop them. Now, they do follow concentration gradients. They're in a place where it's really crowded and there's a bunch of people, then yeah, they're going to go across the border where it's empty. They're just going to stroll over, no one's going to tell them otherwise, and they're going to say, yeah, it's crowded over here, I'm going to go over there where there's a lower concentration of people like me, because I want some me time. Agreed. Then, you have channels, proteins embedded in the membrane that will allow specific substances to flow in and out. These things I'm talking about are called leak ion channels, LEAK. They're by and by specific to a particular ion. Potassium's leak channel doesn't accommodate sodium. These are not absolute, but for our purposes they are. So potassium, K+, cannot just waltz through the membrane anywhere at once. It can't. It does not work that way. But there's leak channels that are open, just like a tunnel, and it can walk through and walk back. But it's got to be the right kind of person. It's got to be potassium, and it's got to be the right environment. Potassium isn't going to go to a place where there's 1,000 times more of it. It's going to follow a concentration gradient. Or or it's going to do that in response to if there's a negative charge that attracts it. But it's not going to do it randomly. It's going to do it for a reason that we could understand. Concentration gradient, charge attraction. That's kind of like a trail through the forest. It's still a trail. You can get from Poland into Germany. There's not police and guards and gates, but it's not an easy journey. Not just anybody can do it. There are many, 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 many more potassium leak channels than sodium leak channels, than calcium leak channels, than chloride leak channels. Okay, remember that. Then you've got the big highway that runs into the border guard security station hut. And there's lights, and there's gates, and there's guards. And you can't get in without a visa or a passport or both. You can't get in without a good reason, and they decide. They don't just let anybody in, and it's very strictly regulated. You get the point. When it comes to these kind of gated channels, there's a couple that are worth mentioning. There are ligand-gated ion channels, and there are voltage-gated ion channels. And ligand-gated voltage channels require a ligand to bind to a receptor site. A ligand is a key, and a receptor site is a lock. And a ligand-gated ion channel has a keyhole for a specific key, a specific ligand. So an example would be a neurotransmitter like acetylcholine. Norepinephrine is a neurotransmitter, but it cannot bind to acetylcholine's receptor site. There's specificity there. And so there's ligand-gated ion channels. It's a little bit like you pull up to a parking garage and you tap your badge, beep, and the gate goes up. And that works for me in Penn Valley, but if I tried to do that at UMKC, the gate wouldn't go up. They wouldn't let me in. Fair enough. That's ligand gated. The ligand opens an ion channel. So a neurotransmitter is the ligand, but it's sodium that goes in or out, or potassium that goes in or out. It's not the ligand that goes in and out. They're ligand gated ion channels. Okay? There's as well voltage-gated ion channels. And voltage-gated ion channels open or close in response to a change in the charge difference, in response to a change in the membrane potential, in the cell membrane that it's embedded in. So if I'm a voltage-gated sodium channel, then I might open if the cell membrane that I'm embedded in gets depolarized. And if enough said. If it's depolarized, then I'll open. Okay. So, depolarized. This is where we're at now. Depolarized means less polarized. Something that once was opposites becomes more alike. Depolarized means, if you're at -70, depolarized means more positive, closer to zero, and closer to a threshold. Alright? So imagine a cell membrane is like grandma. And I don't know if you had a grandma like mine, but if you push her, she's got a lot of patience. And you can push her, nothing. You push her. But if you push her, and you push her, and you push it, and you push it, at some point, she's gonna start saying, I've had it up to here. And when she has it up to here, and you push her over the edge, My grandma said, get some firepower, and out comes the wooden spoon. But she has got a threshold, okay? She doesn't just wake up and grab a wooden spoon and start swatting bum bumps with it, okay? That happens as a result of a sequence and a line of incidents that it gets her, pushes her until she says, "That's it, I've had enough." That is the threshold. A cell has a threshold, and you can depolarize a cell. You can make it a little more positive and a little more positive, but nothing's going to happen unless it hits the threshold, okay? And so a diagram such as diagrams such as 11.9, figure 11.9, and figure 11.11 show you that you can stack bursts of depolarization on top of each other, and eventually you'll be able to reach a threshold. Okay? But I don't know about your grandma, but mine, if you get on her nerves one time, it's not gonna, you do a little something small. But if you push it, and push it, and push it, and push it, believe me, she'll meet a threshold and something will happen. Okay? And think of it this way. If meanwhile I'm helping her with the dishes and I'm taking her, out to dinner and I'm making her a drawing in her car and I'm doing nice things for her, I'm moving her away from the threshold. If I'm doing what I'm meant to do and I'm on my best behavior, I'm moving away from the threshold. And that's hyperpolarization. That's making the membrane farther from threshold, more negative, farther from zero, farther from the threshold. That's hyperpolarization. Okay? This analogy is kind of funny because at the end of the day, we want to meet threshold because we want the nerve cell to have its effect. So we don't want to get swatted, but you get what I'm saying, I think. I hope. All right. So an action potential, remember, is an electrical signal that a cell sends to another cell. A cell can't send that message unless it's stimulated to its threshold. Until it's depolarized enough, then at that point it can send the message. That wooden spoon sends a message, I think you know. You might not know, but take my word for it. The spoon sends a message. So, an action potential is the action. Little bursts of depolarization, that's not an action potential. Those are called graded potentials. Graded potentials are the little pushes that can add up, but not necessarily. And, you can irritate your grandma a little, you can irritate her a lot, but until you push her past her limit, it doesn't matter, she's not going to hit you. Wow, this is getting kind of dark. My grandmother is fabulous. She never abused me. This is a story. I'm trying to tell you guys with the border and with the grandma, I'm trying to tell you a story that you can connect these principles to help you remember it. Okay, so an action potential is a message. A message can only be sent by a neuron if the cell membrane is depolarized enough. If it's depolarized to or past the threshold. Okay? We know that now. We know we got to meet the threshold for the message to be sent, and we know that the way we do it is by depolarizing, by making it more positive or farther away from where we started in that direction. But, you know, another question is, how do you depolarize a cell membrane? And we're going to get into that. Probably we'll stop this video and we'll do that in another chunk. But I want to recap a little bit. Oh, and we have to discuss how the membrane potential is set up and maintained. Okay, so let's do that real quick. Remember I told you that electrical properties of a cell membrane depend on difference in charges across the membrane, more positive on one side and more negative on the other side. It depends as well as the permeability of the membrane. What can come and go, when, where, and why, and how. We all know that nature loves equilibrium, and if nature had its way, everything would just even out, even Steven. That would make nature happy, but it wouldn't make the body happy. Because when everything's equal and level, you can't get anything done. You gotta have a ramp if you want to get work done. And the body, if it sees that it wants to get work done but there's no ramp, it'll build a ramp. And that's what the cell does. The cell builds and establishes a membrane potential. It establishes a difference in charges on one side and the other. And I'm going to tell you a couple of words about how it does that. But I want you to know that that doesn't just happen naturally. A ramp like this doesn't fall out of thin air. This takes work to make it. It takes energy to make it. It costs the cell. And a cell like a neuron, indeed, goes through great pain and energy to set up this ramp so it can do some work. And so, you guys know, a border hut, you know, you gotta build a building, you gotta pay to keep the lights on, you gotta build a gate, you gotta have trucks and guns, you gotta pay the security guards, you know, you gotta keep, you know, water bottles in the fridge. All that stuff costs. And that's the price of being able to control who comes in and out of the cell. Because if you're willing to spend the money and the energy, you can control who comes in and out of the cell. And the cell sets it up so that inside the cell it's more negative and outside it's more positive. So let me say a couple more things about that, then I'll wrap it up here. In the next video I'm going to talk to you about how is an action potential born, generated, spread, and heard. So we know there's a difference in charges from the inside of the cell membrane to the outside. And we know that the inside of the cell is more negative, and we know the outside of the cell is more positive. A couple of things that you need to remember is that the predominant ion in the extracellular fluid is, say it to yourself, sodium. It's sodium. It's Na+. Sodium is positive, and there's substantially higher concentrations of sodium ion in the extracellular fluid than the inside. And that contributes a great deal to the positive charge, the net positive charge on the outside of the cell. On the inside of the cell, the predominant ion is potassium, K+. It's positive. But if I said the inside of the cell is negative. Also, inside the cell is chloride, which is negative. Negatively charged proteins. And the sum, the net charge inside the cell is negative. The positivity of the potassium is eclipsed and overwhelmed by the amount of negative stuff in there. Okay? And there is a pump in the cell membrane that is super important for maintaining this this charge gradient, this charge difference, and it's called the sodium potassium ATP ACE pump. Check out figure Figure, page 377, figure 11.7. Okay, it'll have a picture of it. But the NAK ATPase pump is a channel. It's got a little enzyme called an ATPase. Remember that enzymes that end in ACE chop something? That's what ACE is. And the beginning of the name of the enzyme tells you what gets chopped. So an ATPase chops ATP. And it's the same ATP that you guys know about, adenosine triphosphate, where there's a 5-carbon sugar, a nitrogenous base, and 3 phosphate groups. And ATPase cleaves one of the phosphate groups off, leaving with ADP and some inorganic phosphate. But when that bond is broken, it releases energy. Not a small amount of energy, it releases significant energy. And that energy can be used to move sodium and potassium against their concentration gradients. And that shoveling, imagine a gravel pile. You're gonna shovel a shovel full of gravel up there, some of it's gonna roll down, so you gotta keep shoveling. That's work. Okay, that takes work. The sodium potassium ATPase pumps 3 sodium out of the cell and 2 potassium into the cell. And it requires energy to do so. 2 cats in, 3 gnats out. That's the classic mnemonic. Gnats like flies, sodium, Na, gnat, cat with a K, potassium. It's not perfect, but you should remember that my sister has 2 cats, Leonardo and Grisette. And that's true, and I have 3 pet gnats, Sarah, Percy, and Bill. And that's not true. But when I come over to my sister's place, she lets the cats into her apartment, but she shoos my pets, my 3 gnats, out. But her 2 cats can come in. It's not fair, but that's how it works. So the resting membrane potential is established by the sodium potassium ATPase pump. It requires energy, keeps the outside positive and the inside negative. The other thing you got to remember is that there's a whole lot of potassium leak channels. So the potassium can come and go according to attraction to charges and concentration gradient. There's not energy involved, there's not regulation involved, there's a tunnel that it can leak in and out of. Positive potassium, very high concentration inside the cell, it wants to roll down the ramp to the lower concentration outside, and it does. And it does it through that leak. But at the same time, positive potassium is attracted to the negative charges inside the cell, the negatively charged chloride and the negatively charged proteins. And it has a tendency as well, has a temptation as well to go back in. And there's a bit of an equilibrium there that is established, but at the end of the day, because there are so many more potassium leak channels than there are sodium leak channels, sodium does not really come and go as it pleases very much. Tiny amounts. It's sodium back and forth on all of those leak channels that really help to establish the resting membrane. Because remember, when a nerve cell is at rest and it's unstimulated, the voltage-gated channels aren't being affected, the ligand-gated channels aren't being affected. It's really just the leak channels that are in play in an unstimulated resting cell. Okay, so that's a bit of intro. I know it was long, but I wanted to explain some of this better than I did yesterday, so I hope it makes some sense.